Banjo-Kazooie's a pretty broken game. In fact, sometimes even jumping can cause this really weird zip glitch. This can happen in lots of different places, like right off Stonehenge here, and it's also happened to a lot of runners. For example, just a quick search on Twitch will bring up a lot of clips just like this one here.
Pyramids skip, dude. This was a really good split. What? Did we just teleport? What happened?
In fact, if you want to try out this glitch for yourself, there's a really easy way to do it. Just go to this ledge and hold a full jump off the edge. You'll get a zip pretty much every time, as long as you're playing on the US version of this game. This is the 8-Bit Beast, and this is Banjo-Kazooie Landing Zip Glitch Explained, or better known by its more formal name, Banjo's big buffy head gets stuck in the ground and it makes him go zoom. So to understand this glitch, let's go to our favourite glitch hunting program, BizHawk, with ScriptHawk. ScriptHawk will show us various valleys on the left, and I've blown up this really important valley, zip and landing Y up on the top right there. So when you jump, jumps follow the laws of physics, and you can calculate how long it's going to be until you land, and that's given in a number of frames. A bigger jump means it'll be longer until you land. And if we do our jump as described before, we can see rather than zip being false there, it's going to say zip equals true before we even land on the ground, and we do indeed get a zip. So zips are actually really well understood, and if you open up ScriptHawk, it will predict in advance whether or not you're going to zip out of a jump. Before we launch into a full explanation, I just want to give you a sense of scale in this game. So I've got Y and DXZ shown up the top right there, and that's essentially your horizontal and vertical speed. You can see if we're moving around, our DXZ is a number about 16, and if I get into Talon Trot, we're going to be moving quicker and quicker at about 23. If I jump to Y, we'll sort of go up and down. And you can see Y gets bigger and bigger towards the end of the jump because you're moving quicker towards the ground. If I were to jump off a ledge, then rather than Y going up to about 24, it will go all the way up to about 51 there. And that's crucial for this glitch. So now let's look at what's happening with this glitch. In a normal jump, you'll sort of jump up into the air and sort of land with your feet in the floor. Now this wouldn't make a whole lot of sense, so the game runs a line of code here which basically spits you out of the floor. And it works normally 99% of the time. But something really interesting happens if you jump off a ledge and you fall with such a particular height that your head sort of ends up in the floor. Now the game considers you in the floor because you're underneath it, but it also considers you in a wall because your head's sort of stuck in the floor and the game thinks you're stuck in a wall. So it runs the code to eject you out of a wall, and then it runs the code to eject you out of a floor. And you sort of end up over to the side but then also up out of the floor. Now how precise is this glitch? Well, the floor is usually 10 units tall, and Banjo is about 50-60-ish units tall. So what that actually means is you have to be exactly 56 to 66 units under the floor when you're landing from your jump. Coming back to our BizHawk example, we can now see why this glitch just doesn't work on every jump, because normally the Y value only hits kind of like the 20s. You'll never get 50 units into the floor. And if you just do any old jump off the ledge here, then usually it won't line up perfectly. But if we do that very precise jump that we talked about before, where you're sort of jumping off at a full height, you can see that our landing Y is going to be minus 60, and that was in that range we talked about, so the zip's going to be true. We then just let the jump play out and Banjo will zip off to the side. So at this point you might be wondering, well, on the demo I showed before, you zip to the edge of the floor, but I seem to be zipping somewhere in the middle of the floor. And the answer to this dilemma comes from our beautiful view of wireframe mode. So the floor itself is actually made up of a whole bunch of triangles. We see this very, very big triangle here is what we've been doing our zips on, and Banjo is essentially going to zip to the edge of this triangle. Which edge? Well, it's the closest edge to wherever he landed. So we can get a few different zips here. If I do a full jump out here, I'm going to zip to this sort of edge of the triangle just here. Whereas if I angle my jump a little bit differently and sort of angle towards the other end of the triangle, well, that didn't work, but we can try jumping to this end of the triangle, and we'll zip to this edge of the triangle too. So the glitch is a bit finicky, but you can pretty much get any edge of the triangle you want. You can also zip over to this other end of the triangle if you get your jump going out really, really far. There we go. Now one thing you might notice is that if you zip to the edge of a floor triangle, you could get a really big zip if there was a really big triangle. And this is an example of the biggest one that I know of. We use a little bit of speed to help us along by just hooking on the edge of this platform, and we'll just see what happens. You can see Banjo zipped across basically half the level in one frame, so there's really no limit to how far you can zip with this glitch. One surprising thing is that the well-known Jinxie clip is actually an example of a zip. So we're in Gobi's Valley here right now, and you can see this floor triangle with the sand is pretty big. What you do for Jinxie zip is you sort of get a lot of speed on Jinxie, zip to this nearby ledge, and you zip sort of under Jinxie. Jinxie doesn't perfectly connect to the floor, so you can sort of get underneath and zip to this edge. So we'll give an example of this working. You sort of beak barge in, and then you zip underneath. You'll see during this beak barge that the Y velocity will build up if you have a look on the top right, and that Y velocity is basically how far you're moving downwards. So you move really far downwards until zip is true. You can see zip hit true there for a sec, and you zip to the nearby floor triangle, which is behind Jinxie. So the difference between this working and not working is, well, if you zip further along this bit of the edge of the floor triangle, it won't work because you won't go onto Jinxie. But if you zip further in, then it will work. Now, how do you decide whether you zip further in? Well, if you're further sort of to the right, then the closest distance is going to be more up here. Whereas if you're more to the left here, the closest distance is going to be outside Jinxie. So in general, you want to be beak barging sort of towards the right as you're going into Jinxie, and that'll get you inside when you go to the nearest edge. This is also why pretty much any strat that can build up downward speed will work for Jinxie zip, because all you need to do is get a zip on the ground when you're about here. I actually had a really fun strat for Jinxie zip, which was to high jump off of one of the legs. Unfortunately, I couldn't replicate the setup for this video, but I remember a couple years ago I was doing it and it was actually pretty consistent. Of course, with any glitch in Banjo-Kazooie, I immediately go and see if we can get 8-10 skip with it. Unfortunately, with this glitch, it is not possible. You can see sort of the floor triangles near the 8-10 note door all meet at that point there, and there's no real good spot that you can zip to get behind the door. Pretty much any spot you're going to zip to is this line seam that runs in front of the door there. Not to mention the 8-10 door actually touches the ground, and I'm fairly sure you can't zip past an object if it's touching the ground like that door does. The reason Jinxie zip works is because there's a gap between Jinxie and the ground. If you ever want to mess around with zips yourself, all you need to do is freeze your Y velocity and set it to -1600. On the US version of the game, the Y velocity is at 37C4BC, and you can see when I did that, Banjo sort of zipped across to that zip position. Now Banjo will be pretty much locked to the triangles, so you can sort of jump around to free yourself up a little bit, but Banjo is going to be locked to those triangle positions. In fact, if we jump back into wire mode, you can see with this frozen zip velocity, you can pretty clearly see Banjo being locked to those triangles. You can't escape those triangle coordinates no matter what you do if you've got that zip velocity frozen. If you'd like to try this out for yourself on console, then I've got this handy little Game Shark code here. You press the L button and that makes you zip. And as long as you're holding the L button, you'll keep zipping to whatever triangle you're at. Feel free to mess around with that and see what you can find. There's lots of interesting things. Now that we've seen a few examples, I want to launch into a couple of cases where this zip glitch doesn't really work out so well. So this is the PAL version of the game that we're looking at, and up till now we've just been looking at NTSC. The difference is that PAL runs at 25 frames per second, whereas NTSC runs at 30. Now the way they actually compensate for that is they make Banjo move slightly faster on PAL, so that it exactly cancels out the difference. So apart from cutscenes and stuff, PAL and NTSC run at pretty much the same speeds in terms of movement, but that means that Banjo actually moves a little bit longer in a frame than he does on NTSC. As a result, this setup that we had doing a big jump off the edge no longer works to get a zip on PAL, but there's a bunch of other places that work on PAL but not on NTSC. You just got to test and find the differences. One other important thing to note is transformations. So given the pumpkin, for example, has a different hitbox, this same setup will not work for zipping through the ground. In fact, it's really strange, but I couldn't find any jump height that would work for the pumpkin to zip, no matter what height I sent it to or what velocity I froze myself to on the floor. So I'm not actually sure if it's possible to zip with the pumpkin. Speaking of transformations, I really wanted to know whether Bottle's bonus transformations affect this at all. I mean, Banjo's head is a lot bigger there. Turns out they actually don't, so you can do a full jump off here and you'll still get the zip even with Big Head Banjo. Even with what I call Stretch Limo Banjo, you still get the zip. So that doesn't seem to change it at all. It's a bit of a shame that Stretch Limo Banjo doesn't work, because I've always been looking for an excuse to use this ridiculous Bottles bonus in a category. So far the only application of this I've ever found is getting this jiggy a little bit easier in Clanker's Cavern. Unfortunately, saving 20 seconds on that jiggy isn't worth the several minutes it takes to get Stretch Limo Banjo. The only other nuance worth mentioning with this glitch is that it doesn't really work that well on sloped surfaces. You can see I can pretty much run around on this sloped surface even with zip velocity frozen there, and it's only when I get on the flat ground that Banjo actually zips to the floor triangles. So slopes seem to not really give you zips, which could be good or could be bad depending on your point of view. Last thing I wanted to talk about in this video is how this relates to ledge clips. So if you're familiar with Banjo speedruns, you'll know that a shape like this is very vulnerable to clipping through. We see it with spring clip, 640 skip, dog skip, pretty much everything. But basically what the zip tech does is it allows you to do this on a higher ledge. And how that happens is you sort of jump from a specific height and sort of land on where you would normally get a zip. You zip down through under a ledge. So this stuff isn't possible from ground height, but if you can gain some height beforehand, you'll be able to get through ledges that are much taller than usual. And this is generally only TAS only given the precision of the trick, but it's less precise than something like a big clip. When I found this, I basically went on a rampage. Here's a couple of examples. We got this one in Rusty Bucket Bay, not super useful, but you can get through that bit. We have this clip out of Waz's Cave, which would actually save time in a 100% run if you could pull it off. I don't know how easy it is, but there might be able to be some setup here. You can sort of use the crystal heights to gain some extra precision there, but you fall through your clip out, and it would be quicker than dying. You got this other useful one, entering the church without opening it. We got this random clip off the organ, of all things. Probably the most important one, Mad Monster mentioned early, the original method. We used to jump off the roof and do a ledge clip through the steps, just like that. Now, if you're familiar with how Banjo-Kazooie has progressed, you'll know that we don't really use ledge clips anymore. We use this new tech called bit clips. Bit clips are sort of like a whole different kettle of fish. They're really deep, and that's going to be a topic for an entirely different video. It's actually a bit of a shame because bit clips came out shortly after I found all this ledge clip stuff, and I think the ledge clips would have been a lot more used if it wasn't for bit clips immediately taking over. But bit clips are a lot more versatile, and they are definitely the way of the future. We'll learn more about that next time. That's going to be pretty much all for this video. If you ended up enjoying this, then a subscription would always be appreciated as it really helps out the channel, and I should have more videos coming out like it soon. Thanks so much for watching.